All right, so now I have a sample, and I'd like to edit this sample so that I can do something creative with it and sequence it. If we want to edit a sample, the sample's been recorded into track one, into the track recorder of track one. So I'm going to hold track one and press edit. And once I do that, this brings me into the sample edit mode. And I have a few different options down here that I can access. Each one of these buttons will trigger the area that's above it. So we go into File, that's where I'm at right now. I don't want to load a new sample, I just sampled this. Whenever I'm ready and I've done my editing, I can save this sample so that I can always recall it later. Now remember, this sample is currently stored in the track buffer, in the track recorder. And if I turn off the Octatrack and turn it back on, that track recorder will be empty. Those aren't saved when you turn the power off and turn it back on. So it's really important that when we get samples that we like, that we properly save them. It's also probably a good idea to assign the sample to a free slot, either a free flex slot or a free static slot. So then that way we free up the track recorder so we can record more stuff with it later. Now I'll get to that in a second, but first I want to go into the trim mode. So I'm going to press trim here. This is my sample. And again, I can trigger this since I'm back in the track mode for playback. If I hit T1, that's triggered my sample. And we can see there's an S for the start point, and there's an E for the end, and then there's an L up there for the loop. If I move the A knob here, this allows me to move the start point. And if I move the C knob, this lets me move the end point. Now, I think what I want is this area up here. Now, you might notice as I'm changing the length of the sample, it's changing the speed at which it's playing back, because right now this sample is being time stretched. Let me go to where it says ATTR. This is the attributes. If I go into here, we can see as I move down, the time stretch mode right now it's enabled and it's set to normal. And it thinks that the original tempo of the sample, now it says it's 272.54 BPM. So as I'm changing the start and the end point, it's changing what it thinks the tempo is. It thinks that the area that I've highlighted in the trim mode is 4 bars long, and that's why it's playing back so slow. I don't want this to be time stretched right now, so I'm going to go up to where it says time stretch, and I'm going to change this to being off. Now if I play this, there we go. Now it's not being time stretched. So this will be useful as I trim it. And what I think I'd like to do is I'm just going to take, let's see, I'm using my F knob to zoom in and zoom out. I can use my E knob to scroll forward and backwards. And I just want to make sure that I get the beginning of this proper. Now you might have noticed when I adjusted the F knob, it's centered on the end. If I want to focus on the beginning of the sample, the beginning of the trim point, I can press in on the A knob, and now the start position is in focus. If I turn the F knob to zoom in, I'm zooming in at the beginning of the sample, or the beginning of the trim point, I should say. Okay, and let me go to the endpoint here, and I want to zoom in on the endpoint, so I'm going to press in on the C knob, which corresponds to the end, and now that's where my focus is at. And I just want to make it so that the end is before this kick. Okay, not too bad. So if we want to see more options in any of these areas of the edit menu, we can hold function and press edit, and this will bring up a contextual menu for these specific areas. So we have some different options in the trim menu, but what I really want to do is go to the edit menu. So edit is here. Now I've trimmed this already, so what's highlighted is just the area that I want to play. Now it would be nice to have this time stretch, but I want to make sure that the tempo is accurate. There's a couple different ways to go about doing this. One way is to go into the edit menu, hold function and edit to bring up our contextual menu. And as I scroll down, we have a bunch of different options here, but the one I'm concerned with is coming up eventually. There we go. Calculate BPM from selection. So once you highlight a certain range in your sample, you can make the Octatrack basically guess what tempo that particular selection would be. So I'm going to hit yes. And it's saying the tempo is 140.45. And you know what? That's probably pretty close. So if I play this again, it doesn't change the way it's playing back because time stretch is not enabled. If I go back to the attributes, now I've selected just the region that I want to play. I can turn time stretch on. Oops, make sure I do this here. And now when I play it, we can hear it's playing back more slowly. Let's see how accurate this tempo is. I'm going to exit out of my edit menu here. And now again, we've done the editing, but just to be clear, if I double tap on here, we're playing the sample back from the track recorder. Now, if we like the settings and we want to keep this sample, it's important that we save it to someplace else other than the track recorder. And if this all works out properly, I probably will do just that. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my grid recording here, and I'm going to change the scale setup so that we're just dealing with a 16-step pattern. So I'm going to hold function, press scale, and I'm going to change this back to its default setting, 16 steps. All right, so I'm going to enter a trig here. We're on track 1. It's going to start the sample here, and it's going to play until the end. And if we've time stretched this properly, then we should hear it loop cleanly. Nice. Now, this particular sample would utilize 32 steps. It's basically 2 bars at this tempo. So I'm going to add an extra page of steps. Hold function, scale setup. I'm going to press up here. Now, if I go to the second page, remember what happened with our drums? It automatically copied the trigs from the first page to the second page. I'm going to delete the trig here on the second page. All right. Now it's playing too slow because 120 is our current tempo and it's saying 140 is the tempo of that sample. So I'm going to speed this up. Nice. And since this is being time stretched, now if I wanted to, I could change the pitch without affecting the timing. So these knobs here correspond to my 6 knobs here. Pitch is the first one on the top, so that corresponds to A. If you want to turn them more quickly or in greater values, greater increments, you can simply press in the knob and then turn. I'll bring that back to its default. All right, so we've been able to trim the start and the end point. We were able to calculate the tempo based on the length of the selection. Now I like how this sounds. There's more stuff I want to do to it, but for now, I want to go ahead and save this. So let me go back into my edit menu, hold the track, press edit. I'm going to go over to where it says file. And what I want to do is not only save the sample, but also save the sample settings. And then I also want to assign that sample to a free flex slot. Let me go to save and assign sample. So I'm going to hit yes. Now it gives me the option to name this, and I can delete these characters using Q and no, and I'll name it using my function and arrow keys. And I'm going to call this royalty free. How about we just call it Roy? That'll simplify the process. We'll call this Roy 1. There we go. All right. So it's saving the sample, and now it's asking me, do I want to assign this to itself? Meaning that it'll just assign this saved sample to the same track recorder. I don't want to do that because I might want to sample something else, and it's nice to have those track recorders free and available whenever you want to sample new things. So instead, I'd like to assign this to a free flex machine, a free flex slot, I should say. So let me hit yes. It's assigned to flex 1. Now the last thing I want to do before we move on is make sure that we're actually playing the sample from the flex slot that I saved it to. If I double tap on this track button, we're still playing this from that track recorder. But that's not what I want to do. I want to play this from the flex slot that I saved it to, so then I can free up that track recorder to record some other stuff. So if I go down beneath track recorder 8, I see flex slot 1, and there's my Roy 1 sample. I want track 1 to play this sample slot. So I'm simply going to hit yes. And now it's playing from this sample slot and not from that track recorder. I can verify this by going up to that track recorder here, and I can simply clear the contents of it if I hold function and press clear. Clear all contents of this recording, yes. The recording's been cleared. We see the tempo's been reset. I'm still hearing my sample because it is saved in this free flex slot.